Montana Territory, 1878. A woman steps off a steam train into the harsh glare of an unfamiliar sun, clutching a letter that promised her a final chance at happiness. At 42, Eleanor Abbott carries not just her modest trunk, but the weight of a society that has labeled her a spinster, too old for marriage, too experienced for innocence, too independent for most men's comfort. But what awaits her isn't the security she sought. Instead, she finds rejection, betrayal, and the bitter taste of broken promises. What follows reveals that sometimes life's cruelest disappointments lead us to discover our greatest strengths, and that wisdom, earned through years of living, might be the most valuable dowry of all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Abbott pressed her forehead against the train window, watching as endless plains of golden wheat gave way to the rugged foothills of western Montana. At 42, with her chestnut hair now streaked with silver and fine lines mapping the corner of her eyes, she had long ago abandoned girlish dreams of romance. But necessity, that harsh taskmaster, had driven her to answer an advertisement in the Chicago Tribune. Established rancher seeks sensible, mature woman as wife. Must be practical, God-fearing, and willing to assist with ranch operations. Age: 25-35 preferred. Send correspondence to Jacob Harmon, Clearwater Creek, Montana Territory. Eleanor had hesitated at the age requirement. At 42, she clearly exceeded the rancher's preferences. But desperation had made her bold. After nursing her ailing father through a 3-year illness that consumed their modest savings, his death had left her with mounting debts and few prospects. Teaching positions were scarce for women her age, as schools preferred younger women who might work for less pay. So she had written to Jacob Harmon, being truthful about her age, but emphasizing her many practical skills, her experience managing a household, her knowledge of bookkeeping, her ability to preserve food, make medicines, and even assist with basic veterinary care. Skills she'd acquired helping her father's medical practice. To her surprise, Jacob had responded favorably. His letters, while not romantic, suggested pragmatic appreciation for her capabilities. A woman with experience and practical knowledge would be an asset to my operation, he had written. Youth is fleeting, but wisdom endures. Over 6 months of correspondence, Eleanor had developed a picture of a sensible man with a substantial cattle ranch, a man who valued competence over beauty, stability over passion. Now, as the train whistled its approach to Clearwater Creek, Eleanor smoothed her grey traveling dress, practical, serviceable wool that had seen her through her father's funeral and the dismantling of their Chicago home. In her carpetbag lay 2 additional dresses, her mother's tarnished silver hairbrush, a worn Bible, a precious bottle of lavender water, and exactly 76.43, all that remained after settling her father's debts and purchasing the train ticket west. Clearwater Creek. Next stop, Clearwater Creek. The conductor called, moving through the nearly empty passenger car. Eleanor gathered her belongings, her heart hammering with uncharacteristic nervousness. She had always prided herself on composure, on facing life's challenges with determined practicality. But this leap into the unknown tested even her steady nature. The train shuddered to a halt at a platform barely deserving of the name, just weathered planks beside a small clapboard building marked Clearwater Creek Station. Eleanor descended carefully, her boots finding purchase on the rough-hewn steps. The May air carried the scent of pine and earth, so different from Chicago's coal smoke and crowded humanity. Only 3 other passengers disembarked, a traveling salesman by the look of his sample case, and a weary mother with a sleeping child. The platform held just a station master and a lanky young man leaning against a post, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of straw. Eleanor scanned the small gathering, searching for the man she'd come to marry. Jacob's letters had been vague about his appearance, but she expected someone substantial, weathered by ranch work and Montana seasons. No one present matched that description. The lanky young man straightened as she approached. "Miss Abbott?" he asked, removing his hat to reveal a shock of sun-bleached hair. "Yes," she confirmed. "I'm Eleanor Abbott. Billy Simmons, ma'am. I work for Mr. Harmon. He sent me to fetch you." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "Your trunk, ma'am?" "Yes, thank you. The large brown one there." Eleanor pointed to where the porter was unloading baggage, as Billy arranged. For her trunk to be loaded onto a wagon waiting nearby, Eleanor felt a flicker of unease. Why hadn't Jacob come himself? His last letter had confirmed he would meet her at the station. Perhaps ranch business had detained him. They rode in awkward silence for several minutes before Eleanor ventured, "Is it far to Mr. Harmon's ranch?" "About 7 miles, ma'am," Billy replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Biggest spread in the county, Triple H Ranch." "I see. And Mr. Harmon is well?" Billy's hands tightened visibly on the reins. "Mr. Harmon, well, he's in town, ma'am, at the Clearwater Hotel." Something in the young man's tone sharpened Eleanor's already alert senses. "But not meeting us on the road?" "No, ma'am." The wagon rattled over a rough patch, and Eleanor grabbed the seat to steady herself. "Mr. Simmons, I sense there's something you're not telling me. I would appreciate directness." Billy sighed, finally turning to look at her properly. What she saw in his young face, discomfort, pity, and something like shame, sent a cold shiver through her despite the warm spring day. "Mr. Harmon is at the hotel bar, ma'am. Has been since your telegram came saying which train you'd be on." Billy cleared his throat. "He, got your photograph yesterday." Understanding dawned with brutal clarity. "I see," Eleanor said, her voice remarkably steady despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. "He found me too old in person." Billy had the decency to look away. "He said there must have been some mistake, that you couldn't be the woman he'd been writing to, that you looked different than he expected." The humiliation burned through Eleanor like acid, but decades of maintaining dignity through life's disappointment served her well now. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Simmons. He told me to take you to Mrs. Lawson's boarding house," Billy continued, genuine regret coloring his words. "Said he'd cover a week's lodging while you made other arrangements." "How generous," Eleanor remarked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to think practically. "And where is this boarding house?" "Back in town, ma'am. I can turn around." "No," Eleanor decided. "Let's continue forward. I've come too far to retreat at the first obstacle. Please take me to the Triple H Ranch. But Mr. Harmon is not present to enforce his wishes," Eleanor finished firmly. "I've traveled over 1,000 miles based on promises made in good faith. I intend to look this man in the eye before accepting dismissal." Billy looked torn between admiration and concern. "He won't like it, ma'am." "I don't particularly care what he likes at this point, Mr. Simmons." Eleanor straightened her spine. "One learns at my age that waiting for approval is a luxury one cannot always afford." The young man's lips twitched in what might have been suppressed smile. "Yes, ma'am." He flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. As they traveled, the landscape opened before them, rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen, giving way to broad valleys where cattle grazed in the distance. Under different circumstances, Eleanor might have found it beautiful, might have felt hope rising at the sight of this new land. Instead, she focused on preparing herself for the confrontation ahead. The Triple H Ranch appeared first as a smudge on the horizon, then gradually took shape, a substantial 2-story house of squared logs, several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. As they drew closer, Eleanor could see activity around the structures, men moving between corrals, smoke rising from the house chimney. "This is quite an operation," she observed. Billy nodded. 4,000 acres, nearly 800 head of cattle. Mr. Harmon built it from nothing over 20 years, and no wife to share it with all that time. There was a Mrs. Harmon once, Billy said, his voice dropping. She passed about 5 years back. Fever took her. This new information settled in Eleanor's mind, adding complexity to the man who had rejected her sight unseen. But it didn't excuse the humiliation he'd so carelessly inflicted. As they pulled up to the house, a woman emerged onto the wide porch, grey-haired, sturdy, with a flour-dusted apron and an expression of curiosity that quickly shifted to confusion. Billy. "Simmons, what in tarnation?" she called. "You're supposed to be taking that woman to town." Billy jumped down from the wagon, moving to help Eleanor descend. "Mrs. Kenner, this is Miss Abbott," he said. "Miss Abbott, our housekeeper, Mrs. Martha Kenner." Eleanor nodded politely. "A pleasure, Mrs. Kenner." The housekeeper's eyes widened. "Miss Abbott, but Mr. Harmon said—" She stopped abruptly, colour rising in her weathered cheeks. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding," Eleanor said calmly. "However, I've travelled a considerable distance based on Mr. Harmon's invitation. I believe I'm entitled to a conversation before being dismissed." Mrs. Kenner's expression softened slightly. "Well, I can't argue with that. But he's not here, and likely won't be until evening. Been in town since yesterday. Drinking," Billy added quietly. "Then I shall wait," Eleanor decided. The journey had left her exhausted, hungry and dusty, but pride kept her standing straight. "If it's not too much trouble, perhaps I might freshen up while waiting." Mrs. Kenner hesitated, then nodded decisively. "Come inside, Miss Abbott." "Whatever Jacob Harmon's intentions, basic hospitality remains." She shot Billy a warning look. "Not a word to anyone that she's here. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Billy agreed, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable at being caught between competing authorities. As Eleanor followed Martha Kenner into the house, she took stock of her surroundings. The ranch house was impressive, well built, and solid, with good furniture and signs of prosperity. But it also showed the neglect that comes when a home has no true mistress. Tarnished brass, dusty corners, curtains faded unevenly by the sun. "When Mr. Harmon saw your photograph," Mrs. Kenner began awkwardly as she led Eleanor to a small guest room. "He was disappointed by my age," Eleanor finished for her. "I'm 42, Mrs. Kenner. I was honest about that in my letters." The housekeeper looked surprised. "He told everyone you were 35 at most." A convenient fiction, apparently. Eleanor removed her hat, unpinning it with steady hands despite her inner turmoil. Men often hear what they wish to hear, regardless of what is actually said. Mrs. Kenner's mouth twitched. "That's God's truth." She hesitated, then added, "I'll bring up some washing water and something to eat. You look done in." "Thank you," Eleanor said, finally allowing her exhaustion to show. "Your kindness is appreciated." Left alone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the narrow bed, finally permitting herself a moment of despair. After all the careful planning, all the hopes cautiously nurtured despite her practical nature, to be rejected without even a meeting, it stung more sharply than she'd expected. But Eleanor Abbott had not survived 42 years of life's disappointments by surrendering to self-pity. She had 15 minutes to wallow, she decided. 15 minutes to feel the hurt, the humiliation, the fear of what came next. Then she would wash her face, straighten her spine, and face Jacob Harmon with all the dignity and wisdom those 42 years had earned her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains when Eleanor heard the commotion outside. Men's voices, horses' hooves, the slam of a door. Straightening her dress and checking her appearance one final time in the small mirror, she steeled herself for the confrontation ahead. During the hours of waiting, she had moved through humiliation to anger and finally to a cold resolve. She wouldn't leave without answers. Mrs. Kenner appeared at her door, expression tense. "He's here," she said simply. "In his study. I told him you were waiting and he—" She hesitated. "Was displeased?" Eleanor supplied. "That's putting it mildly." The housekeeper twisted her apron in her hands. "Perhaps waiting until morning might be wiser. He's been drinking. I've dealt with difficult men before, Mrs. Kenner. My father's temper was legendary in our neighborhood." Eleanor moved toward the door with determined steps. "Where is this study?" Reluctantly, Mrs. Kenner led her downstairs and through the large, well-appointed main room to a closed door at the back of the house. She knocked once, sharply. "I told you I don't want to be disturbed," a deep voice barked from inside. "Mr. Harmon, Miss Abbott is here to speak with you." Mrs. Kenner called through the door, her voice steadier than her expression suggested she felt. Silence, then the sound of a chair scraping. The door yanked open to reveal Jacob Harmon, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might once have been handsome before years of sun and hard living had carved deep lines into it. His dark hair and beard showed significant silver, and bloodshot eyes suggested the drinking Billy had mentioned. He wore no jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal powerful forearms. His gaze swept over Eleanor coldly. "I told Billy to take you to town." Eleanor met his stare without flinching, "and I instructed otherwise. Good evening, Mr. Harmon. I believe we have matters to discuss." "There's nothing to discuss." He started to close the door, but Eleanor moved forward with surprising quickness, placing her foot in the gap. 6 months of correspondence, commitments made, a 1,000-mile journey undertaken at considerable expense based on those commitments. She held his gaze. "I believe that merits at least 10 minutes of your time." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her boldness, or maybe just the effect of whatever he'd been drinking. After a long moment he stepped back, gesturing curtly for her to enter. The study was a masculine space, dominated by a large desk covered with papers, ledgers, and a half-empty whiskey bottle. Bookshelves lined one wall, hunting trophies another. The air smelled of tobacco, leather, and spirits. 5 minutes, he said, moving behind his desk without offering her a seat. Eleanor took a chair anyway, settling herself with deliberate composure. "In your letters you expressed appreciation for honesty and directness. I'd appreciate the same courtesy now. Why the change of heart, Mr. Harmon?" He poured another drink, not offering her one. "You misrepresented yourself." "I was entirely truthful. About my age in my first letter," Eleanor countered. 42 years, precisely stated. A woman your age can't bear children." He tossed back his drink. "I need sons to inherit this ranch." The crudeness of his statement made her flinch inwardly, though she maintained her outward calm. "That concern never appeared in your correspondence. Had you mentioned it, I would have acknowledged the unlikelihood, though not impossibility, of children at my age. It should have been obvious." "Nothing is obvious in matters of this importance, Mr. Harmon. Clear communication prevents misunderstandings." She folded her hands in her lap. "Your letters spoke of wanting a sensible, mature woman with practical skills. You specifically stated you valued experience over youth." "I didn't expect quite so much experience," he muttered, glancing at the silver in her hair. The insult stung, but Eleanor had endured worse in Chicago's drawing rooms. "I see. And this revelation from my photograph was so distressing that you chose to hide in a hotel rather than meet me personally." His face darkened. "I don't owe you explanations, madam. I've paid for your lodging in town for a week. That's generous considering—" "Considering what?" Eleanor interrupted, her composure finally cracking. "That I left everything behind based on your promises. That I sold my father's medical instruments and books, family treasures, to finance this journey. Or perhaps considering that you've publicly humiliated a woman who did nothing except take you at your word." Jacob Harmon had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. He reached for the bottle again. Life's full of disappointments. Indeed, I'm experiencing one at this moment. Eleanor rose to her feet. I won't take more of your time, Mr. Harmon. Nor will I accept your charity at Mrs. Lawson's boarding house. I prefer to make my own arrangements. Don't be foolish. You don't know anyone in Clearwater Creek. I know Mrs. Kenner, who has shown more decency in one afternoon than you have, in 6 months of correspondence. And I've met young Billy, who was clearly uncomfortable with your cowardice. She moved toward the door. I'll collect my trunk and be on my way. Where will you go? There was gruff curiosity in his voice now, and perhaps a hint of reluctant admiration. That's no longer your concern. She paused at the door. But I am curious about one thing, Mr. Harmon. What exactly did you expect would happen today? That I would accept dismissal without question? That I would simply disappear, a problem conveniently solved? He refilled his glass. I expected you'd take the week's lodging and find passage back east. Back to what? I have nothing there now. Eleanor shook her head. No, Mr. Harmon. When one has travelled as far as I have, retreat is rarely the wisest option. With that, she left the study, closing the door firmly behind her. Mrs. Kenner waited in the main room, trying unsuccessfully to appear as though she hadn't been listening. I'll be leaving now, Eleanor told her. Is my trunk still accessible? The housekeeper nodded, looking troubled. Miss Abbott, it's nearly sunset. There's no transportation back to town until morning. Then I'll walk. 7 miles, in the dark. There are wolves, miss, and other dangers. Eleanor hesitated. Pride demanded immediate departure, but practicality suggested otherwise. Before she could respond, the front door opened, admitting a lean, weathered man in his early 60s. His hair was completely silver, his face deeply tanned with lines that spoke of laughter rather than hardship. He carried himself with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Evening, Martha," he said, removing his hat. His voice was melodious, with an accent Eleanor couldn't quite place. "Smelled your biscuits from the barn. Hope there's enough for—" He stopped as he noticed Eleanor. "I apologize. I didn't realize Jacob had company." "This is Miss Eleanor Abbott," Mrs. Kenner said, a strange note in her voice. "Miss Abbott, this is Daniel Wilson, Mr. Harmon's partner in the Triple H." Mr. Wilson smiled, revealing even white teeth in his weathered face. "The lady from Chicago? Welcome to Montana, Miss Abbott." His warm greeting, so at odds with Jacob Harmon's coldness, momentarily disarmed her. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson, though I fear my welcome has been somewhat less than enthusiastic from your partner." Understanding dawned in his remarkably blue eyes. "Ah, Jacob's been making a fool of himself again, has he?" He shook his head. "My apologies on his behalf. The man has many virtues, but gracious hospitality isn't among them." "Mr. Wilson, Miss Abbott was just leaving," Mrs. Kenner interjected hurriedly. Daniel Wilson looked alarmed. "At this hour? Impossible. The road to town isn't safe after dark, especially for someone unfamiliar with the territory," I explained. "That," Mrs. Kenner said, "but circumstances are complicated." Eleanor felt caught between humiliation and practical necessity. "Mr. Harmon has made it clear that my presence is unwelcome. I have no desire to impose." "Nonsense. This house has plenty of room, and regardless of whatever disagreement you've had with Jacob, basic hospitality is non-negotiable." His tone was friendly but firm. "Stay the night, and I'll personally drive you to town in the morning, if that's still your wish." Before Eleanor could respond, Jacob Harmon emerged from his study, stopping short at the sight of his partner. "Daniel, didn't expect you back from the North Pasture until tomorrow?" Clearly, the silver-haired man's tone remained pleasant, but Eleanor sensed tension between the two men. "I've just been insisting that Miss Abbott stay the night. The lady can't possibly travel to town in the dark." Jacob's jaw tightened. Miss Abbott and I have concluded our business. Have we? Daniel raised an eyebrow. Martha's made enough supper. For an army as usual. Seems a shame to waste it. He turned to Eleanor. I hope you'll join us, Miss Abbott. I'd be interested to hear about Chicago. It's been years since I've been back east. The invitation, offered with such natural courtesy, provided a graceful solution to her dilemma. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I would appreciate that. Excellent. He glanced at his partner, something unspoken passing between them. Jacob, perhaps you'd like to get cleaned up before supper. You look like you've had a trying day. It was a diplomatic suggestion that Jacob, nonetheless, seemed to take as criticism. He muttered something under his breath and stalked back to his study, closing the door with unnecessary force. Don't mind him, Daniel told Eleanor quietly. The bark is worse than the bite, generally speaking. As Mrs. Kenner led her back upstairs to refresh herself before the meal, Eleanor found herself intrigued by this unexpected development. Daniel Wilson seemed the opposite of his partner in every way. Courteous where Jacob was rude, warm where Jacob was cold, composed where Jacob was volatile. What kind of partnership could exist between two such different men? And why did Daniel Wilson seem so unsurprised by his partner's poor behavior? Most importantly, what would the morning bring when she would have to face the reality of her situation alone in an unfamiliar territory with dwindling funds and no clear path forward? The dining room of the Triple H Ranch reflected its owner's prosperity, a long oak table that could seat 12, gleaming silverware, and china plates that spoke of Eastern refinement. Yet Eleanor noticed small details that betrayed the absence of a woman's touch. Mismatched napkins, tarnished candlesticks, a layer of dust on the sideboard's carved edges. Mrs. Kenner had prepared an impressive meal. Roast beef, potatoes with fresh herbs, green beans, and her famous biscuits. The aroma filled the room as Eleanor entered, having changed into her second-best dress, navy blue with a modest lace collar, slightly worn at the cuffs, but still presentable. Daniel Wilson rose at her entrance, pulling out a chair with natural courtesy. Miss Abbott, please join us. I hope your room is comfortable. Very, thank you, Eleanor replied, taking the offered seat. Jacob Harmon sat at the head of the table, looking marginally more composed than earlier, but still radiating displeasure. He had changed his shirt and trimmed his beard, small concessions to social expectations. He acknowledged Eleanor with a curt nod, but said nothing. Martha tells me you've come from Chicago, Daniel said as Mrs. Kenner served the food. I spent 2 years there as a young man. Fascinating city. It's changed considerably in recent years, Eleanor responded, grateful for the neutral topic. Especially since the Great Fire. The rebuilding has been remarkable. You were there during the fire? Daniel looked genuinely interested. Yes, we lost our first home, though thankfully not our lives. My father was a doctor, and we spent weeks afterward treating burn victims. A doctor's daughter, Daniel noted. That explains your composure in difficult situations, Jacob snorted softly, earning a sharp glance from his partner. My father believed. In practical education, Eleanor continued, choosing to ignore Jacob's reaction. He taught me basic medical skills, bookkeeping, and household management. He felt women should be prepared for life's hardships, not sheltered from them. A progressive thinker, Daniel commented. Did you assist in his practice? Often, particularly in our later years when his hands began to tremble. I became quite adept at managing his accounts, organizing his medical supplies, and even assisting with minor procedures. Jacob finally spoke. Hardly the skills needed for ranch life. Daniel raised an eyebrow. On the contrary, last month when Miller's boy sliced his leg open on that rusty fence, we'd have appreciated someone with medical knowledge. Doc Perkins was 3 days' ride away delivering the Johnson twins. That's different, Jacob muttered. Is it? Daniel turned back to Eleanor. Tell me, Miss Abbott, Do you have experience with herbal remedies? Martha swears by her willow bark tea for headaches, but I've always wondered about its efficacy. The conversation flowed more easily after that, with Daniel asking thoughtful questions about Eleanor's knowledge and experiences. She found herself describing her father's practice, the patients they'd treated, the community they'd served, and the financial challenges that had ultimately led to her current circumstances. Jacob remained largely silent, though Eleanor, occasionally, caught him watching her with an expression that seemed more confused than hostile, as if he were re-evaluating previous assumptions. As Mrs. Kenner served apple pie for dessert, Daniel steered the conversation in a new direction. "Miss Abbott, forgive my directness, but what are your plans now?" Eleanor set down her fork carefully. "I haven't had much time to consider alternatives. Until yesterday, I believed I was coming to Montana to begin a new life as Mr. Harmon's wife." Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I have limited funds," she continued honestly. "Enough, perhaps, for a week's lodging and a train ticket to Helena or Bozeman, where I might seek employment. I understand both towns are growing and might offer opportunities for a woman with my skills. Helena's expensive," Daniel commented, "and Bozeman's full of fortune-seekers heading to the gold fields. Neither is particularly welcoming to a woman alone. I've managed in difficult circumstances before, Mr. Wilson." "I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Abbott," he said, his blue eyes serious. "But Montana territory can be unforgiving to newcomers without connections." "What would you suggest?" she asked, sensing he had something specific in mind. Daniel glanced at Jacob, who was studying his coffee cup with unusual intensity. "As it happens, we have a situation here that might benefit from your particular skills." Jacob's head snapped. Daniel, hear me out, Jacob." Daniel's tone was mild but firm. "Our ranch manager left unexpectedly last month, remember? The books are in disarray, supply orders unfilled, wage accounts unreconciled." "Billy can handle it," Jacob insisted. "Billy's a fine cowhand, but can barely write his own name," Daniel countered. "We need someone with proper education and organizational skills." He turned back to Eleanor. "The position includes room and board here at the main house, plus a monthly salary of $30. Eleanor blinked in surprise. The offer was unexpectedly generous, more than she'd made teaching in Chicago. "You're offering me employment as your ranch manager." "As our administrative manager," Daniel clarified, "overseeing accounts, correspondence, supply orders, and record-keeping. Given your experience with your father's practice, I imagine you'd adapt quickly to our needs." Jacob pushed his chair back from the table. "This is absurd. We need someone who understands ranching operations." "We have 20 men who understand cattle," Daniel replied evenly. "What we lack is someone who can manage our paperwork properly. The Billings contract alone has dozens of specifications that need careful attention." "A woman ranch manager," Jacob scoffed. "The men would never accept it." "They accepted Miriam Thornton over at the Circle T," Daniel pointed out. "Been running that operation since her husband passed 3 years ago, and it's more profitable than ever." "That's different. She's a widow carrying on her husband's work." "Different circumstances, same capabilities," Daniel turned to Eleanor. "The position would be a 3-month trial initially. If it proves satisfactory to all parties, we could discuss more permanent arrangements." Eleanor's mind raced. The offer provided an unexpected solution to her immediate dilemma, but working closely with Jacob Harmon after his rejection posed obvious challenges. Yet the practical side of her, the side that had managed her father's affairs through illness and death, recognized the opportunity being presented. "It's a generous offer, Mr. Wilson," she said carefully, "but I sense Mr. Harmon has reservations. I wouldn't want to create discord in your partnership." "Jacob and I have disagreed on many things in 20 years of ranching together," Daniel said with a small smile. "We've survived worse." Jacob stood abruptly. "I need air." He stalked from the room without further comment. After his departure, Eleanor looked directly at Daniel. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Wilson? You don't know me. You have no obligation." "To assist me." Daniel considered her question thoughtfully. "Several reasons, Miss Abbott. First, practical necessity. We genuinely need someone with your skills. Second, I believe in addressing injustice when I see it. My partner made commitments to you that created legitimate expectations. While he may no longer wish to honor those in their original form, some compensation seems appropriate. You're offering me a position out of pity, then?" "Not at all." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I'm offering you a position based on the qualities you've demonstrated: composure under pressure, practical knowledge, clear thinking, and dignity in the face of disappointment. Those are rare and valuable traits anywhere, but especially in Montana territory." Eleanor looked down at her hands, weighing her options. She had no desire to be a charity case, but neither could she afford pride at the expense of survival. And beneath her practical considerations, she felt a flutter of something unexpected. Curiosity about this silver-haired man with his thoughtful questions and perceptive observations. "I would require a formal contract," she said finally, "with terms clearly specified." Daniel's face brightened. "Absolutely. I'll draft something tonight for your review." "And Mr. Harmon?" "His consent seems essential." "Leave Jacob to me," Daniel said confidently. "He's a reasonable man beneath the bluster and an exceptional businessman. Once he sees the benefits of having someone with your capabilities managing our affairs, he'll come around. You seem very certain." "I've known Jacob Harmon for 22 years, Miss Abbott." Something like affection softened Daniel's weathered features. "He has many flaws, stubbornness chief among them, but he recognizes value even when it arrives in unexpected forms." Later that evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed in the small guest room, she heard the murmur of male voices from downstairs, sometimes rising in what sounded like argument, then subsiding into discussion. She couldn't distinguish words, but the pattern was clear. Daniel advocating, Jacob resisting, compromises being negotiated. She sat at the small writing desk and penned a careful inventory of her situation. Assets, her remaining 7643, educational background, practical skills. Liabilities, no local connections, limited knowledge of ranching operations, Jacob Harmon's hostility, and opportunities, the position offered by Daniel, possible alternatives in nearby towns. The exercise, when her father had taught her for evaluating difficult medical cases, helped clarify her thinking. By the time she heard footsteps ascending the stairs and doors closing for the night, Eleanor had reached her decision. She would accept Daniel Wilson's offer, not from desperation, but from rational assessment of her best available option. The 3-month trial period would provide stability while she established herself in Clearwater Creek and learned more about the territory's opportunities. If the arrangement proved untenable, she would depart with experience and references. That might serve her elsewhere. As she extinguished her lamp, Eleanor reflected on the day's extraordinary reversals. She had arrived expecting to become Jacob Harmon's wife, and instead might become his business manager. She had anticipated security through marriage, and now faced independence through employment. Most surprisingly, she had found an unexpected ally in Daniel Wilson, whose silver hair and perceptive blue eyes suggested wisdom rather than age, a distinction Jacob Harmon apparently failed to appreciate. 3 months, she whispered to herself in the darkness. Let's see what Montana Territory has to teach a doctor's daughter from Chicago in 3 months' time. Eleanor's first week at the Triple H Ranch passed in a whirlwind of discovery. After signing the contract Daniel had prepared, which she amended with several practical clauses about working hours and specific responsibilities, she was given a small office adjacent to the main house's kitchen. The space had previously served as a storage pantry, but with Daniel's help, it was transformed into a functional workspace with a desk, chair, filing cabinet, and shelves for ledgers and correspondence. Her first task was staggering, sorting through 3 months of neglected paperwork left by the previous manager. Bills of sale, supply invoices, wage accounts, and cattle inventories lay in haphazard piles, many without proper documentation. "It's worse than I expected," Daniel admitted, surveying the chaos on her second morning. "Thomas was good with the men, but careless with records. And since he left, no one has maintained the system at all," Eleanor finished, holding up a stack of receipts tied with string. "Some of these haven't even been recorded in the main ledger. Can you make sense of it?" Eleanor squared her shoulders. "It will take time, but yes. My father's medical accounts were similarly disorganized when I took them over. I'll need to create a proper filing system first, then work backward to reconcile everything. Whatever you need, just ask." Daniel's confidence in her abilities, despite having just met her, bolstered Eleanor's determination. Jacob remained conspicuously absent during her first days, spending dawn to dusk with the ranch hands in the far pastures. Eleanor suspected he was deliberately avoiding her, which suited her purposes as she established her role and systems without interference. Mrs. Kenner proved an unexpected ally, bringing Eleanor meals when she worked through lunch and offering invaluable context about ranch operations. "The spring calving was better than expected," she explained on Eleanor's third day. "Nearly 200 new calves, which won't be in any of those papers yet. And we lost about 30 head to that late March snowstorm." "This is extremely helpful, Mrs. Kenner," Eleanor said, making careful notes. "Do you recall any other significant events that should be reflected in the accounts?" The housekeeper thought for a moment. "The new fencing along the north boundary, that was a substantial expense, and there was trouble with those miners trespassing on the east section. Jacob hired extra men to patrol for a few weeks." Gradually, a picture of the Triple H's operations emerged from both the paperwork and these conversations. The ranch was indeed prosperous, with nearly 12,000 acres, 800 head of cattle, and contracts with buyers as far away as Cheyenne and Denver. But it also faced challenges: water rights disputes with neighboring properties, rising supply costs, and increasing competition from new ranches established as the railroad expanded westward. On her fourth morning, Eleanor presented Daniel with her first financial report, a concise summary of the ranch's current state, including outstanding debts, expected income, and areas of concern. "This is remarkably thorough," he said, reviewing the document in her small office. "I've been trying to get a clear picture like this for months." "There are still gaps," Eleanor admitted. "I'll need to speak with your foreman about cattle movements. And the Billings contract specifications." "I'll arrange it," Daniel promised. "Frank Sullivan's our head foreman, been with the Triple H for 15 years. Good man, though he might be hesitant about dealing with a female manager." "I've encountered similar hesitation before," Eleanor said dryly. "Most men reconsider their position once they realize I'm not attempting to usurp their authority, merely to document their work properly." Daniel's eyes crinkled with amusement. "You're quite something, Eleanor Abbott." The casual use of her first name startled her momentarily, but she found she didn't mind. There was nothing presumptuous in Daniel's manner, just a natural warmth that made formality seem unnecessary. The interview with Frank Sullivan proved more challenging than expected. The foreman, a grizzled veteran of cattle drives with a weather-beaten face and suspicious eyes, arrived at her office visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Wilson says you need information," he began stiffly, hat clutched in calloused hands. "Yes, please sit down," Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I'm trying to reconcile our records regarding cattle movements and sales over the past quarter." Sullivan remained standing. "Don't see how that's women's business." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. My gender is irrelevant to mathematics, Mr. Sullivan. The Triple H sold approximately 200 head to Billings Meat Company in April, correct? 215, he corrected automatically. At what price per head? $18 for the prime steers, $15 for the others. His answers came grudgingly. And the transportation costs? Sullivan frowned. Don't rightly know. That was Thomas's department. I see. Eleanor made a note. Who would have that information? Probably Jacob. He negotiated with the railroad men. For the next hour, Eleanor methodically extracted the information she needed, ignoring Sullivan's obvious discomfort. By the end, the foreman had moved from hostile to grudgingly cooperative, particularly when Eleanor demonstrated knowledge of cattle breeds and market fluctuations gleaned from her research. You know your figures? I'll give you that, Sullivan conceded as their meeting concluded. But running a ranch ain't just about numbers on paper. I'm fully aware of that, Mr. Sullivan, Eleanor replied, which is why I value your practical expertise. I have no intention of telling you how to manage the herd. My role is to ensure the business side of the ranch functions efficiently so that you and your men can focus on what you do best. This pragmatic approach seemed to mollify him somewhat, and he departed with a respectful nod that, while not warm, suggested potential for a functional working relationship. The encounter with Jacob Harmon came later that same day. Eleanor was reviewing supply inventories when a shadow darkened her doorway. She looked up to find him filling the frame, his expression unreadable. Mr. Harmon, she acknowledged calmly, though her pulse quickened. How may I help you? He entered without invitation, glancing around the transformed space with grudging curiosity. Daniel says you've been organizing the accounts. Yes. They required substantial attention, and you've been questioning my foreman. Consulting with him, Eleanor corrected mildly. Mr. Sullivan provided valuable information about the Billings contract that was missing from our records. Jacob picked up one of her neatly labeled folders, flipping through it with a frown. This system, it's different from what Thomas used. Thomas's system was inadequate for an operation of this size, Eleanor said, watching him carefully. I've implemented a double-entry bookkeeping method that will make it easier to track profits, losses, and inventory changes. Seems complicated. It's actually more straightforward once established. For instance, she pulled out a ledger and opened it to a specific page. This shows at a glance how much we're spending on feed versus what we're earning from each section of the herd. You'll note that the southwestern pasture is currently producing the highest return on investment. Jacob studied the page with reluctant interest. How did you determine that? By cross-referencing Mr. Sullivan's herd records with our feed purchases and transportation costs. She indicated the relevant columns. The southwestern herd required less supplemental feeding due to better natural forage, resulting in higher profit margins despite being smaller. For a moment, Jacob seemed genuinely engaged, studying the figures with a businessman's acumen. Then his expression closed again. Daniel says you've asked about the water rights dispute with Blackwell. Yes. It appears to be a significant ongoing expense in legal fees with no resolution in sight. I wondered if there might be alternative approaches worth considering, such as, Eleanor hesitated, aware she was venturing into sensitive territory. The records indicate Mr. Blackwell's primary concern is having sufficient water for his crops during the July dry season. Perhaps a negotiated schedule for water usage might be more cost-effective than continued litigation. You think you understand. Wrenching politics after a week in Montana. His tone was dismissive, but not as hostile as she'd expected. Not at all, Eleanor replied evenly. I'm merely applying business principles to the situation. Every dollar spent on legal fees is a dollar, not invested in ranch improvements or expansion. Jacob studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected. Few of us are, Mr. Harmon. She met his gaze steadily. I hope my work will demonstrate my value to your operation, regardless of your personal feelings about my presence here. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Sullivan says you know something about cattle breeds. My father treated farmers outside Chicago. I learned to distinguish various livestock breeds and their common ailments through his practice. Ha! The single syllable conveyed surprise rather than derision. Without further comment, he departed, leaving Eleanor to wonder whether the encounter represented progress or merely a temporary truce. That evening, as she shared supper with Daniel, Jacob had returned to the pastures for a night check. She described the interactions with both Sullivan and Jacob. Better than I expected, Daniel admitted. Frank's old school, and Jacob— He paused, searching for words. Jacob has difficulty adjusting to change. A common affliction, Eleanor observed, though it seems particularly acute in his case. Daniel smiled. He wasn't always so rigid. Life has a way of hardening some men, especially out here. The previous Mrs. Harmon, Eleanor ventured carefully. Billy mentioned she died 5 years ago. Catherine. Daniel's expression grew solemn. Lovely woman, smart, capable. She and Jacob were well matched. What happened? Influenza. Hit the territory hard that winter. Jacob was away on a cattle drive when she fell ill. By the time he returned, he shook his head. He's never quite forgiven himself for not being here. The information added dimension to Jacob's character that Eleanor hadn't previously considered. That explains some things, she said quietly. Don't mistake understanding for excuse, Daniel cautioned. His treatment of you was inexcusable, regardless of past hurts. Of course, Eleanor took a sip of her tea. But context helps me navigate the present situation more effectively. Daniel regarded her with evident admiration. You have a remarkable capacity for objectivity, Eleanor. A necessary skill when one reaches my advanced years, she replied, with a hint of self-deprecating humor. Daniel's laugh was warm and genuine. 42 isn't exactly ancient, you know. I've got 16 years on you, and I'd challenge any of the younger hands to a day's work. Age is perceived differently for men and women, as you're well aware, Eleanor said. Men become distinguished. Women become obsolete. Only to fools, Daniel replied, his blue eyes serious despite his light tone. Wisdom and experience should be valued regardless of gender, out here especially, where survival often depends on knowledge accumulated over time. As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, she reflected on her first week at the Triple H. The work was challenging but engaging, drawing on skills she'd developed throughout her life. The initial hostility she'd faced was gradually yielding to grudging respect, at least in some quarters. And in Daniel Wilson, she'd found something unexpected. Not just an employer or advocate, but perhaps a friend who saw value in qualities society often dismissed. Montana Territory might yet prove to be the fresh start she'd hoped for, though in a form entirely different from what she'd originally envisioned. By her third week at the Triple H, Eleanor had transformed the ranch's administrative systems. Ledgers were updated daily, correspondence answered promptly, and supply inventories maintained with military precision. The small office now featured clearly labeled filing cabinets, color-coded ledgers, and a large calendar mapping out cattle, movements, supply deliveries, and payment schedules. More surprisingly, she had begun venturing beyond paperwork into other aspects of ranch operations. Each morning before dawn, she rode out with Mrs. Kenner to the chicken coops and garden, learning the rhythms of daily life on a working ranch. In the evenings, she often sat with Daniel on the wide porch, absorbing his knowledge of cattle breeds, territorial politics, and the complex web of relationships that defined success in Montana's ranching community. The Blackwells have been Feuding with the Eastern ranchers for nearly a decade, Daniel explained one evening, as they watched a spectacular sunset paint the mountains. Started over water rights, but now it's about principle more than practicality, which makes resolution even more challenging, Eleanor noted. Pride is rarely a good business partner. Precisely why your proposal intrigued me, Daniel said. A negotiated schedule for water access addresses the practical problem without requiring either side to surrender completely. Has Mr. Harmon considered presenting it formally? Daniel's smile was knowing. He's been studying your analysis for 2 days now. Won't admit it, but I saw him making notes. The mention of Jacob brought a familiar complexity to Eleanor's thoughts. Their interactions remained largely professional, brief discussions about accounts or supplies, occasional questions about her record-keeping methods. He no longer avoided her presence, but neither did he seek it out. The awkwardness of their initial meeting lingered beneath their exchanges, unacknowledged yet palpable. The situation with the ranch hands evolved more positively. Frank Sullivan had begun stopping by her office regularly, initially with financial questions, but increasingly to share information he thought might be relevant to her records. The younger hands, following Sullivan's lead, now tipped their hats respectfully when passing her on the property. "They're calling you the bookkeeper in the bunkhouse," Billy informed her with a grin one morning, as he delivered mail from town. "It's meant as a compliment." "I've been called worse," Eleanor replied dryly, sorting through the letters. "Mr. Wilson says your systems have already saved us nearly $200 in overlooked supply discounts. $237.65 to be precise," Eleanor corrected, looking up with a smile. "Accuracy matters in bookkeeping, Billy. The most unexpected development came in the form of medical emergencies. Word had somehow spread to neighboring ranches about the doctor's daughter at the Triple H. One rainy afternoon, a panicked ranch hand arrived from the Circle T, leading a horse carrying a man with a deep gash in his thigh. Caught himself on a fence post, the hand explained breathlessly, as Daniel and Jacob helped carry the injured man onto the kitchen table. "Boss lady said to bring him here instead of waiting for Doc Perkins." Eleanor assessed the situation quickly. "Mrs. Kenner, I need hot water, clean cloths, and your strongest whiskey. Mr. Wilson, is there a medical kit on the property?" "Catherine?" "Kept supplies in the north bedroom closet," Jacob answered instead, his expression tight with concern for the injured man. "I'll get them." Working efficiently, Eleanor cleaned and examined the wound. "The bleeding has slowed, which is fortunate, but it needs proper closing to prevent infection." She looked up at the faces surrounding her. "I can stitch it, but I'm not a licensed physician." "Doc Perkins is 2 days' ride," Daniel said. "And with this rain," the injured man groaned. "Just stitch it, ma'am. Had worse fixed with less skill." Jacob returned with a surprisingly well-stocked medical box. "Catherine believed in being prepared," he explained briefly, setting it beside Eleanor. Using her father's techniques, Eleanor disinfected, stitched, and bandaged the wound with steady hands, explaining each step clearly to both the patient and Mrs. Kenner, who assisted. The ranch hands watched with expressions ranging from queasy fascination to impressed respect. When she finished, the man flexed his leg cautiously. "Hardly feels a thing now." "Much obliged, ma'am." "Keep it clean and dry," Eleanor instructed. "Return in 5 days to have the stitches checked. Sooner if you notice unusual redness, swelling, or heat in the area." After the visitors departed, Eleanor cleaned the kitchen with Mrs. Kenner's help, conscious of Jacob watching from the doorway. When they finished, he approached, his expression unreadable. "That was well done," he said simply. "Thank you. I had extensive practice assisting my father." Jacob nodded, then added unexpectedly, "Catherine would have appreciated your skill. She always said we needed better medical care in the territory." Before Eleanor could respond to this surprising personal comment, he turned and left the kitchen. Mrs. Kenner raised her eyebrows. "First time I've heard him mention Catherine to a newcomer," she whispered. "That's something significant, mark my words." The incident opened a new dimension to Eleanor's role at the Triple H. Within days, more medical cases arrived. A child with a high fever, a woman experiencing concerning symptoms in her pregnancy, a cowhand with a dislocated shoulder. Each time, Eleanor provided what care she could while being careful to acknowledge her limitations. "I'm not attempting to replace Dr. Perkins," she explained to Daniel after treating a particularly difficult case of croup in the foreman's youngest child. "But basic medical care can make a significant difference when the doctor is unavailable." "You're filling a critical need," Daniel agreed. "This territory has one physician covering nearly 100 square miles. People suffer unnecessarily waiting for his circuit. My father often said that most medical crises could be managed by trained assistants, reserving physicians for truly complex cases." Daniel studied her thoughtfully. "You could establish something more formal, regular clinic hours perhaps, basic care for common ailments." The suggestion caught Eleanor by surprise. "That would extend beyond my duties as ranch manager. Your contract specifies administrative responsibilities as mutually agreed upon," Daniel reminded her with a smile. "I'd consider basic medical care for ranch personnel and neighbors an administrative necessity, keeps the workforce healthy, promotes good relations with surrounding properties." The idea took root quickly. With Daniel's support and Jacob's grudging approval, Eleanor established Wednesday afternoon health hours in a converted storage room adjacent to the main house. Mrs. Kenner assisted, taking the opportunity to expand. Her own knowledge of herbal remedies and basic nursing. "Never thought I'd be learning medicine at my age," she commented one afternoon as they organized supplies. "My Henry always said I should have been a nurse." "Learning has no age limit," Eleanor replied, demonstrating how to properly roll bandages. "My father was studying new medical techniques well into his 70s. Word of the informal clinic spread throughout the valley. By the end of her first month at the Triple H, Eleanor was dividing her time between ranch administration and basic medical care, finding unexpected fulfillment in both roles. The turning point in her relationship with Jacob came unexpectedly during a violent summer storm. Thunder cracked overhead as Eleanor worked late in her office, finalizing the monthly accounts. The rain had been relentless since midday, turning the ranch yard into a sea of mud and sending the usually resilient ranch hands scurrying for shelter. A particularly powerful lightning strike illuminated her small window, followed almost instantly by a deafening thunderclap that rattled the glass. Power flashed through the air, and Eleanor smelled the unmistakable scent of burning wood. She rushed outside despite the downpour to see flames already leaping from the roof of the barn. "Fire!" she shouted, her voice nearly lost in the storm. "The barn's on fire!" Figures emerged from the bunkhouse and main house, Daniel and Jacob first, followed by ranch hands pulling on boots and coats. The barn housed not only valuable equipment, but several prized horses, including Jacob's stallion Thunder. "Get a bucket line started!" Jacob shouted, already running toward the burning structure. "Sullivan, get the pump working!" Eleanor ran to the well, helping the men organize a chain to pass buckets of water toward the flames. Within minutes, everyone on the property was engaged in the desperate effort, even Mrs. Kenner, her grey hair plastered to her face by the relentless rain. "The horses!" someone shouted as panicked whinnies rose above the storm's fury. Without hesitation, Jacob sprinted toward the barn entrance, disappearing into the smoke and flames before anyone could stop him. "Jacob!" Daniel's anguished cry carried over the chaos. Minutes passed with no sign of him. The roof timbers began to crack ominously as the fire consumed the dry wood despite the rain. Daniel moved toward the entrance, clearly intending to follow his partner, but Sullivan and two other hands held him back. "Too dangerous, boss!" Sullivan shouted. "Roof's about to go." Eleanor scanned the scene rapidly, noting the barn's layout from her previous visits. "There's a side entrance near the tack room," she called to Daniel. "Less direct exposure to the roof timbers." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed a water-soaked blanket from the bucket line and ran around the perimeter of the barn. Flames licked at the side walls, but the entrance, she remembered, remained relatively clear. Wrapping the wet blanket around her shoulders and head, she ducked inside. The heat and smoke hit her like a physical wall. Crouching low where the air remained marginally clearer, she called out, "Mr. Harmon, Jacob!" A horse screamed somewhere ahead, the sound chilling despite the intense heat. Eleanor pushed forward, using the blanket to shield her face from falling embers. Through the smoke, she made out a figure struggling with the gate of a stall where a large, dark horse reared in panic. "Jacob!" she coughed, reaching his side. He turned in shock. "Eleanor, get out! It's coming down!" "Not without you," she insisted, helping him force the gate open. Together, they managed to free the terrified stallion, who bolted toward the main entrance where the other horses had escaped. "That's all of them," Jacob gasped, bent double with coughing. "We need to—" A thunderous crack interrupted him as a burning beam crashed down just feet away, sending up a shower of sparks and cutting off their path to the main doors. "Side entrance," Eleanor choked out, grabbing his arm. "This way!" Half dragging each other, they stumbled through the thickening smoke toward the exit Eleanor had used. The roof groaned ominously above them. Jacob suddenly pushed her forward with surprising strength just as another beam gave way, crashing down where they had stood seconds before. They burst into the rain-soaked night, collapsing to their knees in the mud as Daniel and the others rushed toward them. Behind them, the barn roof caved in completely with a sound like the end of the world. "Eleanor!" Daniel reached them first, his face etched with relief and fear. "Jacob, are you hurt?" Jacob couldn't answer, overtaken by a violent coughing fit. Eleanor's own lungs burned, but she managed to gasp. "Smoke! Need to clear their lungs!" The last thing she remembered was Daniel's strong arms lifting her before darkness claimed her consciousness. Eleanor woke to sunlight streaming through, unfamiliar curtains, and the scent of lavender water. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't her small room off the kitchen. The bed was larger, the furnishings more refined, the ceiling higher. "You're awake," Mrs. Kenner's relieved voice came from nearby. "Thank the Lord." Memory returned in fragments. Fire, smoke, Jacob struggling with the horse gate, the terrible crash of falling timbers. Eleanor tried to sit up, but fell back as pain lanced through her chest. "Easy now," Mrs. Kenner cautioned, moving to adjust her pillows. "Your lungs took quite a beating with that smoke." "Jacob," Eleanor managed, her voice a rasp. "Recovering. Like you. Stubborn man refused to stay in bed, though he's not much better off." The housekeeper poured water from a pitcher. "You've been out nearly a day." Eleanor accepted the water gratefully, each sip soothing her raw throat. Looking around more carefully, she realized she was in the main house's finest bedroom, a space she'd glimpsed only briefly during her initial tour. "This is Catherine Harmon's room," she said with surprise. Mrs. Kenner nodded. "Jacob insisted, said you needed the most comfortable space we had. This room hasn't been used since—" She trailed off, her implication clear. The significance wasn't lost on Eleanor. For Jacob to open his deceased wife's bedroom was no small gesture. "The barn?" she asked. "Mostly gone. The men saved the western section and managed to recover most of the equipment. All the horses survived, including Thunder." Mrs. Kenner's weathered face softened. "Thanks to you and Jacob." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "I only did what anyone would do." "Not anyone would run into a burning building, Miss Abbott." The housekeeper's tone was gently chiding. "You risked your life for this ranch. That's not forgotten here. A knock at the door interrupted them. Daniel entered, his face lighting with relief when he saw Eleanor awake. "There you are," he said warmly. "Had us worried." "I'm sorry to cause concern," Eleanor replied. "It seems I've displaced you from the master bedroom." "Nonsense. This room should be used, not preserved like a museum." He approached the bed, studying her with genuine concern. "How do you feel?" "Like I've swallowed fire," she admitted, "but otherwise intact. Dr. Perkins examined you yesterday. Said your quick thinking about using the wet blanket likely saved both you and Jacob from worse. Lung damage." Daniel pulled a chair closer to the bed. "That was incredibly brave, Eleanor, and incredibly foolish." "I couldn't stand by while—" She paused, the intensity of the memory surprising her. "While Jacob was in danger?" Daniel finished, his expression thoughtful. Eleanor considered this. "While anyone was in danger," she corrected. "It wasn't specifically about Jacob, wasn't it?" His blue eyes held hers steadily. Before she could formulate a response, another knock came, and Jacob himself appeared in the doorway. He looked haggard, his face pale beneath its tan dark shadows beneath his eyes, but he stood straight, his gaze fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're awake," he said simply. "As are you, apparently against medical advice," she replied, falling back on light criticism to mask her sudden discomfort. A brief smile touched his lips. "Dr. Perkins and I have different opinions about necessary rest." Daniel rose. "I'll leave you two to talk." He squeezed Eleanor's hand briefly, then departed with Mrs. Kenner, closing the door behind them. Jacob remained near the doorway for a moment, as if uncertain of his welcome. Then, with decisive steps, he moved to take the chair Daniel had vacated. "You saved my life," he said without preamble. "We saved each other," Eleanor corrected. "You pushed me away from that falling beam." "You shouldn't have been in there at all." His tone held no accusation, only a kind of wondering disbelief. "Why did you come after me?" The question was direct, demanding equal directness in response. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Because losing you would have devastated this ranch and the people who depend on it." "A purely practical consideration, then?" His dark eyes studied her. "Hardly pure," she admitted. "There were other factors." "Such as?" Eleanor looked away, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "Despite our inauspicious beginning, Mr. Harmon, I've developed a certain respect for your operation here, and for the man who built it." Jacob leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly at the movement. "I've treated you poorly from the beginning." "Yes, you have," she agreed, turning back to him with renewed composure. "But I've observed enough to understand it wasn't entirely about me." His eyebrows rose. "You've been analyzing me along with my ledgers." People are often more transparent than they realize, especially in crisis situations. A hint of his usual defensiveness returned. "And what have you concluded about me, Miss Abbott?" "That you're a man haunted by loss," she said quietly. "That you value competence but fear attachment. That you reject what threatens your carefully constructed defenses." The directness of her assessment clearly startled him. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by something more complex, a recognition that bordered on respect. "You're remarkably perceptive," he finally said. "I've had many years to observe human nature, Mr. Harmon. One advantage of being too old, as you might say." The reference to his initial rejection hung between them. Jacob had the grace to look genuinely ashamed. "About that," he began awkwardly. "My behavior was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Eleanor agreed calmly, "but perhaps understandable given certain contexts." "Daniel's been talking," Jacob surmised with a frown, "only enough to provide perspective. The details of your grief remain private." Jacob was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the window where late afternoon light painted the room in golden hues. Catherine was 36 when she died, he finally said. We'd been married 12 years, never had children, though we'd hoped. He stopped, his hands tightening on the chair arms. When your photograph arrived, something about your eyes reminded me of her. It was unsettling. The admission caught Eleanor completely off guard. Of all the explanations she'd considered for his rejection, this hadn't occurred to her. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been difficult. It's no excuse for how I behaved." He met her gaze directly. "I owe you an apology, Eleanor Abbott, a proper one with no qualifications or explanations. The use of her first name, intentional and deliberate this time, marked a shift between them." "Apology accepted, Jacob," she replied, offering his given name as acknowledgement of this new footing. He nodded, satisfaction briefly crossing his features. Then, with characteristic directness, he changed the subject. "The barn will need rebuilding before winter. I've been reviewing your financial reports to determine how to allocate resources." Eleanor smiled at this return to practical matters. "The contingency fund I identified last month should cover initial materials without disrupting cash flow for fall operations. So I noted, your organizational systems have proven their worth." He shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with praise but determined to give it. "Daniel was right about your value to the Triple H. High praise indeed, coming from you. I recognize competence when I see it, eventually." A hint of self-deprecation colored his tone. "Even when it arrives in unexpected packages." Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. Kenner appeared at the door. "Dr. Perkins is here for a follow-up check, and Mr. Wilson says the foreman needs to speak with you urgently, Mr. Harmon." Jacob rose with obvious reluctance. "We'll continue this conversation when you're stronger." "I'd like that," Eleanor replied, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. After he left, Dr. Perkins examined her thoroughly, declaring her lungs remarkably resilient for a city woman. He prescribed another day of bed rest, followed by light duties only for a week. "You're fortunate," he told her as he packed his bag. "Smoke inhalation has taken many a good person, especially those not accustomed to western wildfires." "I understand. I have you to thank for my care," Eleanor said. The doctor, a grizzled man in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, smiled. "Mostly just monitored what Martha Kenner was already doing correctly. That woman has natural healing instincts." He paused, studying Eleanor thoughtfully. "I hear you've been providing basic medical care to the surrounding ranches." "Only the most fundamental treatments," Eleanor assured him quickly, always making it clear I'm not a licensed physician. Good. He nodded approvingly. "Too many charlatans out here claiming medical knowledge they don't possess. But from what I've seen and heard, your skills are genuine." "My father was thorough in his teaching. Dr. Abbott from Chicago?" The physician looked surprised. "I know his work on pulmonary treatments. Published in the medical journal, wasn't it? 1872? Eleanor's heart warmed with pride. 1871, actually. You're familiar with his research? When one practices medicine in isolation, one reads everything available. Dr. Perkins fastened his bag with decisive movements. "I've been thinking of taking on an assistant, someone with basic training who could handle routine matters while I focus on more complex cases." The implied offer hung in the air between them. Eleanor considered it carefully before responding. "A fascinating proposition, Doctor. Though I have existing commitments to the Triple H. Of course. Just something to consider." He moved toward the door. "Perhaps we could discuss it further when you're recovered. I'd be interested in hearing more about your father's methods." After the doctor departed, Eleanor lay back against the pillows, mind racing despite her physical exhaustion. The conversation with Jacob had shifted something fundamental between them. not erasing the past, but creating possibility for a different future. And now Dr. Perkins' unexpected interest in her medical background opened yet another potential path. When she'd answered Jacob Harmon's advertisement in Chicago, she'd seen only one narrow road forward: marriage to a stranger for security and survival. Now, less than 2 months later, she found herself with choices she hadn't imagined possible: ranch manager, medical assistant, or perhaps something else entirely that Montana Territory had yet to reveal. The realization brought not anxiety, but a curious sense of liberation. At 42, Eleanor Abbott was not at the end of her story, as Chicago society had implied, but perhaps only beginning its most interesting chapter. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel entered, carrying a small tray with broth and tea. "Mrs. Kenner insisted you needed nourishment, and I insisted on delivering it personally." His smile was warm as he set the tray on the bedside table. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have any right to," Eleanor admitted. "And more confused than I expected." Daniel pulled the chair closer. "Confusion is often the precursor to clarity. What's troubling you?" With the ease that had characterized their relationship from the beginning, Eleanor found herself sharing both Jacob's unexpected apology and Dr. Perkins' proposition. Daniel listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. "Interesting developments," he commented when she finished, "both professionally and personally. I'm not entirely sure how to proceed with either." Daniel's blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "The Eleanor Abbott I've come to know will analyze all options thoroughly, consider practical implications, and make a sound decision." She smiled at his confidence. "The Eleanor Abbott you've come to know is currently questioning whether rationality alone should determine her path forward." "A wise question," he agreed, his voice softening. "Some decisions benefit from listening to more than just practical considerations." The way he looked at her as he said this, with warmth that went beyond friendship but remained respectful of boundaries, added yet another dimension to Eleanor's already complex situation. "I seem to have arrived in Montana seeking one straightforward opportunity," she mused, "only to find myself surrounded by unexpected possibilities." "Life often works that way," Daniel replied, "rejecting us from the path we thought we wanted, to direct us toward the one we actually need." He reached out, briefly covering her hand with his own. "Rest now. Decisions can wait until you're stronger." As he left, Eleanor found herself pondering not just the choices before her, but the remarkable fact that she had choices at all. A luxury she hadn't dared imagine when boarding that train in Chicago just 2 months ago. Eleanor's recovery progressed steadily over the following week. By the 8th day after the fire, despite Dr. Perkins' advice for continued rest, she insisted on returning to her duties, albeit with modified hours and frequent breaks enforced by Mrs. Kenner's watchful eye. Her small office became a gathering place where ranch business continued, despite her convalescence, with Jacob and Daniel often bringing paperwork directly to her, rather than requesting her presence elsewhere. "The Billings contract arrived this morning," Jacob announced, entering her office with a thick envelope. "They're proposing new terms for the fall shipment." Eleanor accepted the documents, noting the unusual courtesy in his manner. Since their conversation in Catherine's bedroom, a new dynamic had emerged between them. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect that made their interactions less strained. "I'll review it today," she promised, already scanning the first page. "Their initial figures seem higher than market value." "My thought exactly." He lingered by her desk. "Sullivan wants to begin barn reconstruction next week. I'd appreciate your input on the budget allocations." "Of course, I prepared some preliminary figures." She handed him a folder from her organized stack. "You'll note I've included options for expanded storage capacity since we've been consistently exceeding previous year's hay requirements." Jacob reviewed the document with evident approval. Thorough as always. I'll discuss these options with Daniel. He paused at the door. Eleanor, the town council is meeting tonight. They've requested my presence regarding the water rights issue, your proposal for negotiated access scheduling. Our proposal, he corrected. I'd like you to accompany me. Your financial analysis forms the backbone of the argument. The invitation startled her. Town council meetings were exclusively male domains in most Western territories. Are you certain that's wise? My presence might undermine your position with the traditional members. Perhaps, Jacob acknowledged, but it might strengthen it. With those who value substance over convention. Besides, this territory was built by those willing to challenge Eastern traditions when practical necessity demanded it. This philosophical perspective, so at odds with his initial treatment of her, demonstrated how profoundly their relationship had evolved. In that case, I would be happy to attend. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor prepared for the council meeting, selecting her most conservative dress and arranging her hair in a severe style that emphasized competence over femininity, Mrs. Kenner entered with an unusual expression of concern. "There's talk in town," the housekeeper said without preamble, "about you staying here at the ranch." Eleanor paused in pinning her hair. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that follows single women living among unmarried men." Mrs. Kenner's weathered face showed genuine worry, especially since the fire, with Mr. Harmon suddenly speaking well of you. "I'm employed here," Eleanor said calmly, "with a formal contract and clearly defined duties." "Folks understand a housekeeper," Mrs. Kenner replied. "Been doing this work 30 years myself without raising eyebrows, but a female ranch manager? That's different, especially one who came here initially as—" She hesitated. "As Jacob Harmon's prospective bride," Eleanor finished for her. "Yes, I can see how that might fuel speculation. Judge Parker's wife is particularly vocal, says it sets a poor example for young women in the territory." Eleanor considered this information carefully. She'd encountered similar situations in Chicago after her father's death. Social disapproval that could quickly translate to professional barriers. While she personally cared little for others' opinions, she recognized the potential impact on both her position and the Triple H's. Standing in the community. "Thank you for telling me, Martha. I'll give it proper consideration." The town of Clearwater Creek consisted primarily of one main street lined with essential businesses: general store, telegraph office, small hotel, saloon, and the territorial office that housed both the sheriff and local government functions. As Jacob helped Eleanor down from the wagon that evening, she noted the curious glances from passers-by, confirming Mrs. Kenner's warning. "Quite the stir we're causing," she murmured to Jacob. He followed her gaze to where two women had paused, their conversation to watch them. "Small towns survive on gossip when entertainment is limited," he replied dismissively. "Pay it no mind." The council meeting was held in the back room of the territorial office, where 6 men of varying ages sat around a scarred oak table. Their expressions when Eleanor entered behind Jacob ranged from surprised to disapproving. "Gentlemen," Jacob greeted them with a nod, "I believe you know Miss Eleanor Abbott, the Triple H's administrative manager." Judge Parker, a portly man with impressive side whiskers, frowned visibly. "This is a closed council meeting, Harmon. Down business. Miss Abbott has prepared the financial analysis regarding the water rights proposal," Jacob replied evenly. "Her presence is necessary for an informed discussion." "Unprecedented," muttered another council member, a thin banker named Holloway. The youngest member, whom Eleanor recognized as the general store owner's son, looked merely curious. "I don't see the harm in having someone who understands the figures, especially since this affects multiple ranches." Judge Parker's frown deepened. "Very well, but this isn't to become regular practice." Eleanor took a seat slightly behind Jacob, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the hostile atmosphere. As the meeting progressed through routine matters, she observed the council dynamics carefully, noting alliances and tensions that might affect the water rights discussion. When their proposal finally came under consideration, Jacob presented it with straightforward logic. The current litigation benefits only the lawyers, he concluded. This schedule would guarantee Blackwell sufficient irrigation during critical growing periods, while ensuring our cattle have reliable water access. And you're willing to concede? Priority access during July, Judge Parker asked skeptically. The financial analysis demonstrates it's more cost-effective than continuing legal battles, Jacob replied, gesturing toward Eleanor. Miss Abbott has calculated the comparative costs with remarkable precision. At Jacob's nod, Eleanor distributed copies of her report, clear, concise documents that outlined current litigation expenses versus the economic impact of scheduled access. You'll note that even with reduced water access in July, the Triple H would save approximately $340 annually by avoiding legal fees. For Mr. Blackwell, the guaranteed irrigation schedule would increase crop yields by an estimated 20%. The council members reviewed her figures with varying degrees of comprehension. The banker, Holloway, studied the documents with growing interest. These projections are remarkably detailed, far more sophisticated than I'd expect from a... He paused, apparently reconsidering his wording, from a ranch operation. Miss Abbott managed her father's medical practice in Chicago for many years, Jacob said, a note of pride in his voice that surprised Eleanor. Her bookkeeping systems have already improved our profitability significantly. That may be, Judge Parker interjected, but there are broader considerations than just finances. Precedent for one. If Harmon compromises with Blackwell, others might expect similar considerations. Heaven forbid we establish a precedent of reasonable negotiation, Jacob replied dryly, earning chuckles from the younger council members. The discussion continued, growing increasingly technical as they debated water volume measurements, access schedules, and enforcement mechanisms. Throughout, Jacob consistently deferred to Eleanor on financial details, treating her expertise with a respect that gradually influenced the council's attitude. By the meeting's conclusion, even Judge Parker was addressing questions directly. To her, the council will take your proposal under advisement, the judge finally announced. We'll present it to Blackwell and his representatives next week. A promising start, Jacob commented as they left the territorial office. Your figures made the difference. They couldn't argue with that level of detail. Numbers have a way of cutting through prejudice, Eleanor agreed. Though I suspect your willingness to include me despite convention made an impression as well, Jacob helped her into the wagon, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary. I've been reconsidering many of my conventions lately. The ride back to the ranch passed in comfortable conversation about the meeting and its potential outcomes. As they approached the Triple H, Eleanor noticed Daniel waiting on the front porch, his figure illuminated by the lamplight from the house. "How did it go?" he called as they pulled up. "Better than expected," Jacob replied, helping Eleanor down. "Her analysis impressed even old Parker." Daniel smiled warmly. "I'm not surprised. Eleanor has a way of exceeding expectations." Something in his tone carried particular meaning, causing Jacob to glance between them with a thoughtful expression. "I should check on Thunder," Jacob said after a moment. "He's been restless since the fire." After he walked toward the rebuilt stable, Daniel turned to Eleanor. "You look tired. Was it very difficult?" "Initially uncomfortable," she admitted, "but ultimately productive. I believe the council will support our proposal." "Our," Daniel repeated, smiling. "You've become quite invested in the Triple H. It's difficult not to invest in something you helped build," she replied, "even if the foundation preceded your arrival." They settled on the porch chairs, the evening air cool but pleasant after the day's heat. Daniel studied her profile in the fading light. Martha mentioned there's been talk in town. Yes, she warned me before we left. Apparently my presence here is causing speculation. Are you concerned? Eleanor considered the question carefully. Not personally. I've never placed much value on social approval, but I wouldn't want to damage the ranch's standing in the community. The ranch can. Whether gossip, Daniel assured her. I'm more concerned about how it affects you. Your position here, your comfort. My 3-month trial period ends next week, she noted. Perhaps it's time to evaluate longer-term arrangements. Daniel shifted in his chair. I've been meaning to discuss that with you. Your contributions to the Triple H have exceeded every expectation. Jacob and I both want you to stay on permanently. That's generous, but does it address the underlying issue? A single woman living among unmarried men will always invite speculation, regardless of contracts or professional boundaries. There are ways to address such concerns, Daniel said carefully. Conventional solutions that would silence gossip while securing your position. The implication hung in the air between them. Eleanor turned to face him directly. Are you suggesting marriage, Daniel? His blue eyes held hers steadily. I'm suggesting it could be considered among your options, if such an arrangement would be agreeable. The proposal, oblique as it was, sent an unexpected warmth through Eleanor. Daniel Wilson had become more than just an employer. His kindness, intelligence, and quiet strength had earned her genuine affection. Yet she sensed hesitation in his manner, a careful consideration that made her wonder about his true feelings. Marriage should be more than a practical solution to social complications, she said gently. Agreed, Daniel replied, which is why I mention it only as a possibility to consider, not as an immediate proposal. He reached over, briefly touching her hand. Eleanor, your arrival has brought unexpected joy to this ranch. To me, personally, whatever arrangement allows you to remain here comfortably is worth considering. Before she could respond, hoofbeats in the yard announced a visitor. A young ranch hand from a neighboring property dismounted hastily, his expression urgent in the porch lamplight. Miss Abbott, he called. Doc Perkins sent me. There's been an accident at the Miller place. Machinery accident, real bad. Doc says if you could come with medical supplies, he'd be grateful for the assistance. The crisis effectively ended their personal conversation. As Eleanor hurried to gather her medical kit, she was aware of conflicting emotions. Concern for the injured Miller, professional satisfaction at Dr. Perkins' request for her assistance, and a complex uncertainty about Daniel's carefully worded suggestion. The simplicity she'd sought in answering Jacob Harmon's advertisement months ago seemed increasingly elusive. Instead, Eleanor Abbott found herself navigating waters deeper and more complex than she'd anticipated. Professional opportunities, community tensions, and emotional attachments that defied easy categorization. As Daniel helped her into the waiting wagon, his hand steady beneath her elbow, she wondered which path would ultimately prove right, not just for her practical security, but for the woman she was becoming in this unexpected Montana chapter of her life. Autumn transformed the Montana landscape into a canvas of gold and crimson as Eleanor's 6th month at the Triple H Ranch approached. The Blackwell water rights agreement had been successfully implemented, bringing an unexpected peace to the valley. Barn reconstruction was complete, with expanded capacity based on Eleanor's recommendations. Her informal medical clinic now operated 2 days weekly, with Dr. Perkins attending once a month to handle more complex cases. Yet amid these professional achievements, Eleanor found herself at a personal crossroads. Daniel's oblique suggestion of marriage remained unaddressed, creating a gentle tension between them. Jacob, meanwhile, had evolved from reluctant employer to respectful colleague. occasionally revealing glimpses of deeper feelings through small gestures. Fresh wildflowers, mysteriously appearing on her desk. A rare book of medical illustrations delivered from Helena with no note attached. The situation reached its turning point on a crisp October morning when Eleanor discovered both men waiting in her office, their expressions unusually serious. "Gentlemen," she greeted them, setting down the mail she'd collected from town. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong," Daniel replied, his silver hair catching the morning light. "But we need to discuss something important with you." Jacob nodded, his demeanor uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your position here at the Triple H." Eleanor's heart sank. Despite her successful management of the ranch's administration and her growing medical practice, the town gossip had continued, occasionally affecting business relationships. Just last week, Judge Parker's wife had ostentatiously avoided Eleanor at the general store, making disparaging comments about improper arrangements within earshot. "I see," she said, maintaining her composure. "Have community pressures finally made my presence here untenable?" "Quite the opposite," Daniel assured her quickly. "We've been discussing your future with the ranch. Your contract period has been extended twice now, but we believe it's time for a more permanent arrangement." Jacob stepped forward, his expression earnest. "You've transformed our operations, Eleanor. Profits are up 20%. Our standing with neighboring ranches has improved through your medical work. You've become essential to everything we do here." "I appreciate that recognition," Eleanor said carefully, "but I'm aware that my position creates certain social complications." "That's precisely what we need to address," Daniel agreed, "but perhaps not in the conventional way." Jacob cleared his throat. "Eleanor, I know I'm the last man who should be making this suggestion, given our history. But we have come to value you not just for your skills, but for who you are." Eleanor looked between them, suddenly understanding the strange tension. "Are you both proposing to me?" The men exchanged glances, and Daniel laughed softly. "In a manner of speaking, yes, though not quite as you might imagine." Jacob unrolled a document on her desk, a legal partnership agreement with her name alongside theirs as equal owner of the Triple H Ranch. "We're proposing to make you our full partner," he explained. "Equal share in all assets, operations, and profits. Your name officially added to the ranch title." Eleanor stared at the document in disbelief. "This is unprecedented. Women don't hold property rights in partnerships with men they're not married to. Montana Territory has more progressive laws than most regarding women's property rights," Daniel said. "Judge Parker confirmed it's legally sound, if socially unconventional." "And the community reaction?" Eleanor asked practically. "Will be mixed," Jacob acknowledged. "But a legal business partnership is harder to criticize than the current ambiguous arrangement. It gives you official standing that even the most traditional residents would have to acknowledge." Eleanor traced her finger over her name on the document. "This would entitle me to 1/3 ownership of everything." "Everything," Daniel confirmed. "The land, the cattle, the buildings, future profits. You've earned it through your contributions." "But why not the conventional solution?" she asked directly. "Marriage would resolve the social complications more definitively." The men exchanged another glance, and Jacob spoke first. "Because neither of us wanted to force you to choose between us." The simple honesty of his statement took her breath away. Eleanor looked between these two men who had become so important to her in such different ways. Jacob with his fierce intensity and hard-won respect, Daniel with his steady warmth and unwavering support. "We've discussed it at length," Daniel added gently. "Jacob and I have been partners for 22 years, through all manner of challenges. We believe the three of us could build something remarkable here, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared vision rather than conventional arrangements." "This isn't what you came to Montana seeking," Jacob acknowledged. "You wanted security through traditional means. We're offering security of a different kind. Independence, equality, and the freedom to define your own role. Eleanor rose from her desk, needing movement to process this unexpected proposal. She walked to the window, gazing out at the ranch that had become her home. Beyond the main house and outbuildings, the vast Montana landscape stretched to the mountains, wild, unconventional, and full of possibilities that defied Eastern traditions. And if I were to develop personal attachments, she asked quietly, her back still to them. Your personal life would remain your own, Daniel replied. The partnership agreement concerns business matters only. Any other relationships would evolve naturally without contractual obligations. Eleanor turned back to face them. This is highly unorthodox. So is a female ranch manager and medical practitioner, Jacob pointed out with a hint of his old directness. You haven't exactly embraced convention since arriving here. The observation startled a laugh from her. Fair point, Mr. Harmon. There's something else, Daniel said, pulling another document from his coat. Dr. Perkins asked me to give you this. Eleanor accepted the paper, an official certification naming her as Territorial Medical Assistant, authorized to provide basic health care under Dr. Perkins' distant supervision. The document legitimized the work she'd been doing informally for months. He filed the paperwork last week, Daniel explained. Said your skills were too valuable to the territory to remain unofficial. Emotion welled unexpectedly in Eleanor's throat. When she'd boarded that train in Chicago 6 months ago, she'd been a desperate woman seeking the barest security through marriage to a stranger. Now she stood contemplating a future unimaginable then, professional recognition, property ownership, and relationships based on earned respect rather than dependency. I'll need time to consider this properly, she finally said. It's a significant decision. Of course, Jacob agreed immediately. Take whatever time you need. But know that the offer comes from our highest regard, Daniel added, and our genuine belief that your wisdom and experience make you the ideal partner for the Triple H's future. After they departed, Eleanor sat with the document spread before her, methodically analyzing the proposition as she would any business matter. The partnership agreement was indeed legally sound, offering protections and rights normally unavailable to women. The medical certification provided professional standing independent of the ranch. Together, they represented not just security, but true autonomy. Yet beyond the practical considerations lay more complex emotional terrain. Both men had become important to her in different ways. Daniel's friendship had blossomed naturally from their first meeting, his quiet wisdom and kindness offering companionship she treasured. Jacob's respect had been harder won, yet somehow the journey from his initial rejection to their current understanding carried its own profound significance. Eleanor was still contemplating these complexities when Mrs. Kenner knocked gently at her door. "Telegram from town," the housekeeper announced, handing her an envelope. Ryder just delivered it. The message was brief but startling. "Father's colleague seeking heir, stop medical practice and property in Chicago. Vacant, stop, respond immediately if interested. Stop lawyer Henderson." Eleanor sat back, the telegram trembling slightly in her hand. Dr. James Henderson had been her father's oldest friend and professional associate. If he was offering her inheritance of a practice, it represented yet another path, a return to Chicago, to the familiar world of city medicine and established society. A month ago, such an offer might have seemed providential. Now it prompted an entirely different calculation. Chicago represented the known, the traditional, the path society deemed appropriate for a doctor's daughter. Montana offered the unconventional, the challenging, and the unexplored. As twilight painted the mountains purple and gold, Eleanor walked the perimeter of the ranch, weighing her options with the careful consideration that had guided her through Life's previous challenges, each choice offered distinct advantages and limitations. Each would shape her remaining years in profound ways. She found herself on a small rise, overlooking the entire Triple H operation. The sprawling main house with lamps now glowing in the gathering darkness, the newly rebuilt barn, the bunkhouse, where ranch hands shared evening meals, the small cabin she'd converted to a medical clinic. In the distance, smoke rose from neighboring ranches, where families she'd treated gathered for supper. "Quite a view," came Jacob's voice behind her. He approached with characteristic directness, but stopped a respectful distance away. "Daniel, thought you might be out here. It helps me think," Eleanor explained, "to see everything in perspective. And are you finding perspective?" She smiled slightly. "I received a telegram today. An opportunity to return to Chicago and take over a medical practice." Jacob's expression remained carefully neutral. "A significant offer. Yes, a return to everything familiar. The life I was trained for. Will you accept it?" Eleanor considered the man standing before her, so different from the angry, dismissive figure who had rejected her 6 months ago. 6 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Chicago represents security, respectability, a clear path forward. And now? Now I understand that security takes many forms, she replied thoughtfully. The most reliable kind doesn't come from external circumstances, but from knowing your own capabilities. The last light caught the silver threading through Jacob's dark hair as he nodded understanding. "You've built something here that would be difficult to leave behind." "I have," Eleanor acknowledged, "both professionally and personally." Jacob took a careful step closer. "Eleanor, whatever you decide about the partnership offer, know that I deeply regret my initial treatment of you. I was blinded by grief and unable to see what was before me." "And what do you see now?" she asked softly. "A remarkable woman whose so-called disadvantage, her age, is actually her greatest strength." His gaze held hers with uncharacteristic openness. "Your wisdom, your experience, your perspective, they're invaluable, not just to the ranch, but to this entire community. To me." The simple honesty of his statement touched something deep within her. "Thank you, Jacob." As they walked back toward the main house together, Eleanor's decision crystallized. With each step, the Chicago offer represented a retreat to the familiar. The Triple H partnership offered advancement into new territory, personally, professionally, and literally. In the main house, she found Daniel waiting in the study, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. "Jacob mentioned your telegram," he said as they entered. "An opportunity back east." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, "a chance to return to the life I knew." The two men exchanged glances, both clearly preparing themselves for her departure. The unspoken bond between them, partners for decades through hardship and success, suddenly seemed to Eleanor the foundation upon which she could build her own future. "I've decided to decline the Chicago position," she announced, watching relief wash over both their faces, "and to accept your partnership offer with one condition." "Name it," Jacob said immediately. "That we expand the medical clinic into a proper infirmary," Eleanor said, "with space for Dr. Perkins to train me and others for more comprehensive care. This territory needs medical services as much as it needs well-run ranches." Daniel smiled broadly. "I believe that can be arranged." Later that evening, as the three new partners shared a celebratory meal in the dining room, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived in Montana seeking the most conventional form of security, the marriage to a man who had judged her too old, too experienced for his needs. Now she sat as an equal partner with two men who valued precisely what the first had rejected: her wisdom, her experience, her strength of character. To the Triple H, Daniel proposed, raising his glass, and its promising future. To partnerships built on respect rather than convention, Jacob added, his gaze lingering on Eleanor. Eleanor raised her own glass, feeling the weight of the moment. To wisdom, she said simply, and those who recognize its value. Outside, Montana, stars emerged against the deepening sky, illuminating a landscape wild and challenging, but filled with possibilities for those brave enough to forge unconventional paths. Eleanor Abbott, once rejected mail-order bride, now ranch partner, medical practitioner, and architect of her own destiny, had found not just security, but something far more precious. A life where her age and experience were not liabilities, but her greatest assets, recognized and valued by those who possess the wisdom to see beyond convention to the truth of human worth. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.